Good morning, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and here is your detailed forecast update for January 20th, 2024. We're going to be taking a look at powerful severe tropical cyclone Sean offshore from West Australia. We'll talk about the Coral Sea Tropical Low expected to dump torrential rainfall across North Queensland, and just a rainfall forecast across the tropical north as it is, and then thunderstorms expected across the southwest of Western Australia and parts of Queensland as well. All of that plus more coming up in today's weather forecast. If you are brand new to the channel, please consider subscribing, but let's get stuck straight into things today with an update on severe tropical cyclone Sean. You can see it over the WA coastline right now, just barreling parallel to the coastline, about 200 kilometres now towards the northwest of Exmouth. This system is a very strong severe tropical cyclone of Category 3 proportions, and it's probably about to get upgraded to a Category 4. The system around the centre of it, of the eye wall, has winds gusting up to 200 kilometres an hour. It is much stronger than we did initially expect, and that was just going to be the case with it being a small system. It was going to be very susceptible to its environment, and it has found itself in a very healthy environment right now. Conditions in Karratha last night were proper tropical cyclone. 280mm of rainfall falling around Karratha, 300mm in suburbs adjacent to the Karratha metropolitan area, or town centre I should be saying, and winds averaging 70 to 80 kilometres an hour, gusting up to about 110 to 125 kilometres an hour at times. So it was a true tropical cyclone in Karratha. They received plenty of rainfall, plenty of strong winds. So if you are living in Karratha or around Karratha, or pretty much anywhere between Karratha right down through Ningaloo, including Exmouth and Onslow, I'm eager to hear exactly what it was. So flick me an email if you've got photos and videos to attach, or leave a description of this system in the comments section down below. I'd be very eager to see what this system was like for your area. You can see a defined eye wall and an eye on the radar imagery well to the offshore, well away from Exmouth. That is indicative that this system is actually quite strong. It's much stronger than what I reckon it's being estimated at right now, and it's still funneling in a lot of rainfall and a lot of moisture around it. Winds around the Exmouth area, you can see it at the airport, 61 kilometres an hour, gusting up to 83 kilometres an hour. It's probably a little bit stronger at the Exmouth centre, 65 kilometres an hour on Theverend Island, and then up through Barra Island and Varanus Island. Winds between 50 and 60 kilometres an hour now, but they're really starting to drop off there, which is good to see. And the rainfall also now beginning to ease out of the Karratha area, and it doesn't look like much rainfall is going to be on the cards afterwards. But yeah, it was just this steady, moderate to heavy stuff that came through overnight. It was the outer bands of this system, and like I said, 280mm dropped around the Karratha area. Huge rainfall observations there, and certainly going to be there where to stay in quite a few years, probably a number of years actually, and this will make Tropical Cyclone Sean one of the wettest tropical cyclones of the Pilbara region in quite a while. Pilbara tropical cyclones rarely drop more than 300mm of rainfall just because of their fast motion and the fact that the Pilbara is basically a desert, but this one certainly did, and that's more than a year's worth of rainfall for the Karratha area, and certainly more than a year's rainfall for some of the adjacent areas around Karratha. But yeah, a very strong system. It's a lot stronger than, like I said, what we expected. Here's a look at the infrared satellite imagery. So if you're a little bit more in the know in regards to what tropical cyclones look like on satellite, you'd be able to look at this and see, wow, this is actually a little bit stronger than maybe Category 2 or 3 strength than what we were expecting this time yesterday. But taking a look at the system around a defined and a very small eye around the centre of the storm, we've got some pretty cool cloud tops here, which means some very strong thunderstorms are rotating around the centre. Some good thunderstorms on the northern side as well, and there will be some more rainfall flinging into the West Australian coastline just from these outer bands through here. Exmouth's saving grace has been the fact that they've kind of got themselves in a bit of a dry air pool. In the satellite imagery here, you can see that there's a little bit less intense of convection. You're seeing those blues and those greens colours come through. That's pretty weak convection. That's just kind of higher level, low, wispy cloud that's moving through there. Certainly nothing rain bearing, and as such, Exmouth has actually missed out on a lot of the rainfall so far. There will be some good falls coming through throughout the remainder of today, though. You can see heavy falls expected to pipe up around the Exmouth area at some point today. I reckon they'll pipe up in about 2 or 3 hours or so, and heavy rainfall is expected throughout Exmouth and across to Onslow and down to Ningaloo and Coral Bay throughout the remainder of today. The rainfall will ease out of the West Australian coastline by early tomorrow morning, and the showers pretty much completely dying off by tomorrow lunchtime around the Exmouth area. This system does still have a little bit of juice left in the tank. It will continue to intensify throughout the course of today. It's likely to reach a peak intensity a little bit stronger than where it is now, either much later tonight around sort of midnight, or very early tomorrow morning before terminal weakening kicks in by around tomorrow late morning or early lunchtime, that kind of time block there. And by tomorrow evening, this system will certainly be on its way out, starting to begin its extratropical transition by Wednesday morning, which means it will be a terminally weakening system at this time as it heads well offshore from Western Australia. Again, no threat to land beyond later on tonight, even in regards to showers and heavy rainfall moving through. That's going to be dragged away pretty quickly. With the high tide that's coming through in the next couple of hours around the Exmouth area, I believe a storm tide is certainly imminent there, especially into the Exmouth Gulf. I think it is. I'm not 100% sure of the name of the geography around this corner of Western Australia. I don't look at the weather here too often, but you can see peak wind waves about 8 metres high offshore where this tropical cyclone is along the coastline. They're running at about 4.5 to 5.5 meters at this time, and coinciding with the storm tide, we're likely to see peak storm surges about half a meter to a meter above the highest astronomical tide for areas between Onslow through to Exmouth. I reckon Ningaloo and Coral Bay will escape it, just considering they're on the backside of the system and they are a little bit more protected from both those winds and those waves. But certainly between Onslow right down to about Exmouth and including the Exmouth Gulf area, I think that there will be some pretty significant coastal flooding there, not only because it's so flat, but because we are expecting a pretty beefy storm tide of around 2 to 3 feet, maybe 4 feet for the absolute worst of locations. But yeah, certainly something we're going to keep a very close eye on. Exmouth is going to receive a tropical cyclone impact by the looks of things. I mean, all signs are pointing to that in regards to the system or the backside of this stuff here coming through here. So I do expect the winds to temporarily ease off, but just with this rainfall that's going to stream through here, I reckon Exmouth will receive some pretty gnarly wind gusts and certainly some pretty heavy rainfall on the backside of this system. Tropical Cyclone Sean sure hasn't disappointed. This is a strong tropical cyclone and certainly was worth taking seriously. I mean, we're not talking about a severe tropical cyclone impact, and I don't even think you could call this a Category 2 tropical cyclone impact on the West Australian coastline. It did behave pretty much as expected, but just for around the Karratha area, I think the sustained winds were a little bit higher than expected. The rainfall is much higher than expected. I mean, yesterday I was saying falls between that 40 to 150 millimeter mark looks to be what's expected, and then Karratha pretty much doubled that. So again, we're very off with the rainfall prediction, but in terms of a tropical cyclone impact and what we were saying for preparations, I think we absolutely nailed it here, and pretty much every forecast agency as well nailed it. It was a difficult storm to predict, mind you. This system here, we weren't exactly sure what West Australia was going to cop, just considering it wasn't going to be making a direct landfall anywhere. It was going to be skimming the coastline, and it's very susceptible to its environment as well, so a wobble in the track or finding itself in a good pool of energy would mean that this system would have dramatic ramifications to the West Australian coastline, but unfortunately it stayed pretty much as expected. Just pushing the forecast forward, and I'm only doing this to eliminate the fear that people are having that Perth is going to get a tropical cyclone impact. The Facebook guys are still talking about it, and it's driving me absolutely wild every time I open the damn app. We are expecting the low pressure system to head down to the southwestern corner of Western Australia by probably around Saturday, and I think the only thing that this is going to provide to the southwest corner that's meaningful is going to be a bit of a reprieve to the heatwave conditions that West Australia is currently enduring right now. The low pressure system will be very weak. A few showers and plenty of cloud is expected to be coupled with it, so a bit of rainfall is possible Saturday afternoon, but it's going to feel more like a cold front blowing through than it will a tropical low or tropical cyclone. It's certainly not going to be a strong system by that point, and you can see the weekend, all in all, is actually expecting quite a few showers to be moving through there, which would be very, very welcome indeed, because those temperatures are going to be brutal today across the southwest of Western Australia, and just brutal all week pretty much. Now, before we go and talk about Queensland, that basically does it for the tropical cyclone. I would just like to briefly touch on those temperatures over the southwestern corner of Western Australia. Today is expected to be the hot day, but we've got some very hot nights ahead of us, and as such, heat stress is certainly going to be a concern across not only the Perth metro area, but the southwest and the central weed belt just as a whole. So today, Perth expecting a top into the 40s, probably 42, pushing 43 in some locations. Most major forecast models taking the maximum to about 43, even touching 44 around the Perth metro area, and it will be a late one as well, probably pushing 43 or 44 by 3 or 4 p.m. this afternoon and evening. The Access forecast model suggests a few thunderstorms down into the south parts of the wheat belt, around sort of the Boddington, Collie, down to Manjimup, that sort of area. A few thunderstorms possible there, and there is also the chance of a thunderstorm in the southern suburbs of Perth with little or no rainfall, but again, I don't expect it to be severe, and I also don't expect the thunderstorms to be a problem for the Perth metro area or even for the northern suburbs as a whole. Typically, we get these thunderstorms on days like today form over the hills, but today they're more sort of going to be concentrated in the south, so areas around Byford and Armidale could pick up a storm or two, but again, I wouldn't be getting your hopes up right now for this system. And I would just like to say the Axis isn't really a reliable forecast model right now. I mean, it's calling for a top of 47 degrees in Perth. Now, that's not going to happen. 47 degrees is not going to happen at all, but coupled with a little bit of humidity that we're going to be having throughout the course of today, just given the tropical nature of this heat, and the fact that it is going to be very warm around Perth just as a whole, the feels like temperature will definitely be pushing into the mid, probably even the high 40s temporarily around the Perth metro area. So it's certainly going to feel a lot warmer than 42 or 43, that's for sure. Very little breeze is expected. Now, I'm not looking forward to tonight. An overnight minimum of 29 to 30 degrees expected around the Perth metro area, and if you're a follower of the Eastern Bef, which can be very reliable for temperatures, an overnight minimum of 32 42 degrees. We're just going to see this low pressure system set itself up slightly offshore, and that's just going to be dragging in those northeasterly winds, which will be pretty light, all things considered. So there's not going to be a breeze to keep things cool either, and as such, those temperatures are going to stay boiling throughout the course of tonight. Tomorrow expected to be a little bit more mild compared to today, a top of 38. Same deal for Wednesday as well, 38, and it'll be a little bit humid on Wednesday, actually. Humidity hovering around that sort of 30 to 40% throughout the day, so it will feel quite sticky. Thursday, that dry heat continues, 42 degrees expected. Friday as well is a bit touch and go whether it's going to be a hot day. The Bureau of Meteorology expecting a hot one, but it doesn't look like the other forecast models fully on board with it right now, so for Perth it could go either way. It could be a 36 degree day or it could be a 42 degree day. We'll be keeping an eye on things, that's for sure. In terms of this weekend though, it looks like that tropical low does keep those temperatures down as it moves further inland, and as such we're expecting mid-20s to early 30s around the southwest of Western Australia, and early 30s on Saturday for Perth, and then high 20s on Sunday for Perth as well. And then that heat gets dragged further inland and into South Australia, and then it's not our problem, that's for sure. So we'll get rid of the heat forecast right now, and it's now time to talk about Queensland. It's going to be a West Australia and Queensland video, so spoiler alert, but we do have plenty to talk about across the far northern areas of Queensland now, and also quite a bit to talk about just in general around Queensland as well. You can see 14-day rainfall accumulations now really healthy across the Cape York Peninsula. 7-day rainfall accumulations as well, not looking too shabby across some of these locations. That's a sign that thunderstorms are going to be happening over the course of this week, and you can tell that there is going to be some good rainfall building just in the air. You're going to be able to feel it, especially come this weekend across the far northern areas of Queensland. So let's just jump straight into the forecast now. Just touching on thunderstorms across the far north and the central Queensland coastline. We'll likely see a few thunderstorms pop up tonight inland from Townsville and Charters Towers. A storm or two possible around the Atherton Tablelands later on this afternoon as well. Likely to be non-severe though, so nothing crazy and nothing to write home about there. Some good storms along the west coast of the Cape York Peninsula around Karratha up through the indigenous communities there, about as far north as Weipa and Hurricane, and some good thunderstorms as well expected to extend about as far south as Mount Isa and McKinley down there as well. We'll likely see a few possible good thunderstorms there, but again, nothing severe expected. Central Queensland, a storm or two expected adjacent to Mackay down through Ogmore, but again, nothing severe and certainly nothing strong either down there, and it will not really feel like a thunderstorm night, I don't think, in those areas. And a very similar setup for Tuesday as well. I'm not really expecting anything significant on Tuesday. Into the southeast of Queensland, though, we'll likely see a few thunderstorms pop up here and there tomorrow afternoon. I don't think tonight we're expecting anything in the way of thunderstorms, so we can pretty much discount that. And then pushing the forecast forward, we'll likely see a bit of an outbreak sometime on Wednesday afternoon into the central areas of Queensland, north of the Sunshine Coast, inland from Bundaberg through Billawheeler, Edderswald, and then inland to Rolleston. We'll also likely see a few thunderstorms continuing on Thursday night as well. These thunderstorm outbreaks could present the risk of some severe thunderstorms across the southeastern corners of Queensland, especially given the fact that Friday is going to be a hot one, and there's going to be plenty of instability in that environment for thunderstorms to make the most of on Friday. We could be seeing a couple of good thunderstorms here and there to round out this working week, but again, I think the forecast right now just a little bit too flip-floppy, a little bit too hard to tell. It certainly is going to start to warm up as we head into this weekend though, and it looks like those temperatures drop again for the weekend. The thunderstorms head further north, and it looks like it will be a bit dry this weekend. But yeah, southeast Queensland certainly going to be something we take a look at in great detail in tomorrow morning's forecast update, but the thunderstorm forecast there still a little bit too uncertain for my liking, and as such we'll just give a brief forecast there. Now up into the Cape York Peninsula, certainly some very interesting stuff is expected to happen throughout the course of next week. The first real week of tropical rainfall is expected to pipe up across the Cape York Peninsula, and especially around the Cassowary Coast, with some big time rainfall accumulations expected. We'll skip to the good part. There's no rainfall really expected throughout the course of this weekend, but the rainfall will then begin to start to pile up on Sunday afternoon. The rainfall moving into the Cassowary Coast by Sunday night and into early Monday morning. The rainfall then really becoming quite moderate to intense at times, and really consistent through Monday evening, through Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and right out through Friday and Saturday as well, as a tropical low then begins to spin itself up there. But basically a week-long period of moderate to heavy rainfall is expected to get itself jammed up into the Cassowary Coast, and whether a tropical cyclone or a tropical low forms, it's just going to be day after day after day of just moderate, consistent rainfall, and you know the type that I'm talking about. That's the stuff that can present some really big flooding hazards, some really big rainfall accumulations, and some pretty big 24-hourly accumulations as well. Certainly something we're going to keep a very close eye on over the next couple of days. Now, if you've just joined us as well, over the past week we've been talking about this in pretty much every forecast update and in great detail as well, and if you've been following the channel for the last week as well and watching this part of the video, heavier, then you'll know that there's been basically no change on the forecast for the last week, which means we've got great model congruency. All the models are completely stupid, but I'm leaning towards the fact that there is great model congruency here, which means that this rainfall is very, very likely to happen. There's a very high degree of certainty that it's going to be happening, and it's only a week away now as well, which means that the forecast models are now entering into a more reliable period. So you can see that the rainfall, when it does pipe up on Monday, expected to be moderate to heavy at times, and then really start to pile on through Tuesday and Wednesday, expecting some heavy falls through the Cassowary Coast on Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, temporarily easing off and heading further north through Wednesday and Thursday. By the looks of things, there'll still be some moderate falls around the Cassowary Coast through Wednesday, and then Thursday that rainfall really does pile on again, and then we're expecting a tropical low to form either in the Gulf of Carpentaria or in the Coral Sea. There's kind of been a bit of a flip-flop over the last couple of days as to whether it will form in the Gulf of Carpentaria or in the Coral Sea. Now, it doesn't actually matter too much in the way of rainfall numbers where this tropical low does form. If it forms in the Gulf of Carpentaria, it's going to be dragging in a huge amount of rainfall from the west through the Cape York Peninsula and especially through the Cassowary Coast, so for locations between Cairns and Townsville. So regardless of it forming in the Gulf of Carpentaria or the Coral Sea, there'll be a lot of rainfall dragged into those areas. It's just it'll come from a different direction if it develops in the Coral Sea. A tropical low developing in the Coral Sea, obviously you'll get the outer bands of that system funneled straight into the Queensland coastline, and as such the rainfall there will be very intense at times. But yeah, certainly some interesting stuff, and you can see this tropical low does take its time to develop, likely to reach tropical cyclone status actually offshore from the Queensland coastline, and then the forecast becomes a little bit murky here. I find this a little bit hard to believe, just the shape of this system and where it's headed and its track and its speed. I think the forecast beyond about February 1st is a little bit uneasy at this time, which is fine for the Cassowary Coast because pretty much all of the interesting weather is done and dusted by February the 1st, so the tropical cyclone aspect of this storm's lifetime is a little bit up in the air right now, a little bit of confusion in regards to it, but I still do expect a tropical low to turn into a tropical cyclone at some point, whether it's in the Coral Sea or the Gulf of Carpentaria towards the end of next week. I know you all want to know exactly what rainfall is expected though from this system here, so we're going to start things off by taking a look at week-long rainfall accumulations from Sunday the 26th of January out to Sunday the 2nd of February. You can see here 7-day rainfall accumulations. This is the most reliable forecast I think we're going to get from any of the forecast models, especially this far out from this weather system here. But as this tropical low does develop and the onshore flow really piles on for the Cassowary Coast especially, rainfall accumulations between Cairns down through Innisfail, Tully and right down to Cardwell will be between 3 and 600 millimetres. 3 and 600 millimetres, that's a lot of rainfall, especially for the forecast. And if you've been up in far north Queensland and watching the forecast models for a decent amount of time, you know that when 600 millimetres is on the forecast for a few select locations, that is business end rainfall. That's pretty much, you'll be talking about one of the wettest, if not the wettest weeks of the year, and that's certainly what we're going to be faced with now. 600 millimetres as well is a dramatic underestimation for some of these places. Like I say, always, you can get away with doubling or even tripling the rainfall forecast from the Eastern Earth model around the Cassowary Coast, especially for locations between Cairns and Cardwell, and still come out with a very valid number in terms of rainfall. And I do believe if we see a tropical low develop just offshore from the Cassowary Coast, especially off the Daintree coast right now, which is where this forecast model is suggesting this tropical low / tropical cyclone to develop, it's unlikely that that happens exactly how the forecast is suggesting, but if we did get it, just for theoretical sake, we'll likely be seeing rainfall accumulations between 1,000 and 1,500 millimetres across some locations of the Cassowary Coast. Of course, that'd be week-long rainfall accumulations, but even if you divided 1,500 millimetres by 5 days, you're looking at 200 to 300 millimetres a day plus across the Cassowary Coast here, and with some of these wetter days thrown in here where we could be seeing 400 or 500 millimetres of just steady rainfall pile on in these areas over the course of a 24-hour period, you're talking about a dramatic flooding risk, even for far north Queensland, which is built for that type of rainfall. You'll be talking about rivers bursting their banks in dramatic fashion, those dams filling up. It's much needed rainfall, but I don't think they're looking forward to 1,000 millimetres plus rainfall coming through. Now, I know this makes me sound so unreliable how I'm just throwing out massive numbers here across the far northern areas of Queensland, and they are throwaway numbers. There's no forecast model right now that's suggesting 1,000 millimetres plus of rainfall, and certainly nothing up to 1,500 millimetres, but it is still a valid forecast. And you can see here from what the Access forecast model has to say, which is a very good rainfall, a very good forecast model for rainfall. I reckon once that starts to come into the scope and we start to see the rainfall for the 30th and the 31st pile on to the forecast here, we'll be seeing some massive numbers here. So watch the Access model over the coming few days. I think we're going to see some pretty big numbers on that forecast. start to develop there. But as you can see on this, it's more of a day-by-day forecast here. The rainfall begins to pile on for the Cassowary Coast initially throughout the first couple of days of this rainfall event, so both Monday and Tuesday expected to be really wet across the Cassowary Coast, especially on Tuesday, and then through Wednesday that rainfall heads further north. Cairns expecting about 200 millimetres or so, and then into the Daintree rainforest we'll likely see some big falls on Wednesday, and then that rainfall piles on just for the entirety of the Cape York Peninsula, pretty much right down to Townsville through Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday to round out the forecast. So certainly some interesting stuff, that is for sure, and some really big rainfall is expected across the far northern reaches of Queensland. You can see here, if that tropical low does develop just offshore from the far northern areas of Queensland, we'll be looking at 700 or 800 millimetres of rainfall on this forecast alone, which is a massive number, and it really does suggest that some big time rainfall accumulations are on the way. Just to wrap things up here, I would like to talk about the rainfall accumulation starting from the south and heading north. So Townsville, depending on what happens with the rain dome, I'm expecting about 100 to 150 millimetres there. The real rainfall will pipe up from Ingham. I'm expecting about 300 millimetres in Ingham, about 400 to 500 millimetres in Cardwell. Then Tully and Innisfail should comfortably pick up 1,000 millimetres from this rainfall event. Atherton, Mareeba and Raven, so anywhere sort of between that 150 to 350 millimetre mark. It really does depend on what rainfall penetrates the coastline there. Cairns, I'd be saying a comfortable 400 millimetres. Port Douglas, Mossman and areas around the Daintree rainforest should be another 1,000 millimetre report there. I reckon some big rainfall accumulations possible. And then for locations north of Woodgill up through Cooktown and those areas, anywhere between 150 and 300 millimetres looks to be a pretty safe bet, depending on where this tropical low does develop. And again, it is if it does develop as well. Let's just briefly talk about that right now. You can see as we push this forecast forward to midday on the February the 1st, you can see that tropical low developing in the Coral Sea here. The GFS calling for it to have developed in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Again, it really doesn't have much bearing on the rainfall across the Cassowary Coast as a whole, just considering it will be dragging in moisture regardless. It will also actually drive some rainfall if it develops in the Gulf of Carpentaria for the more central areas of Queensland, south of Townsville through to Mackay. And we'll also likely see a tropical low develop on the monsoon trough down in the central areas of Queensland as well. So regardless of what happens, rainfall is set in stone until about February 1st across the far northern reaches of Queensland and the Cape York Peninsula as a whole. Beyond that, it's a little bit more uncertain, but again, it's not a great deal of uncertainty in regards to the system or the systems. Regardless of where they form, powerful rainfall bands are expected, and these systems aren't expected to be problematic tropical cyclones either, not right now at least. So we will keep a very close eye on them, but at this time it doesn't look like it is going to be a massive situation, a massive problem in terms of a powerful tropical cyclone barreling into Queensland, and we're still looking very long range as well, so absolutely no need to panic about it right now. And then much later on in the forecast period into early February, we start to see that energy burst across West Australia again. We'll likely see a couple of tropical cyclones or tropical lows turning into tropical cyclones popping up there into the first week or two of February, so that'll be some interesting stuff, that's for sure. And then beyond the first week of February, it looks like a bit more of a drier period, just looking really long range for Western Australia. Again, nothing in the way of crazy tropical cyclone activity being thrown up on the forecast right now, but certainly areas that I want to be watching: the Northern Territory, northern parts of Western Australia, far northern Queensland for tropical cyclones, and then of course far northern Queensland exclusively for rainfall at this time. But yeah, that basically does it for the forecast, not only for the far northern reaches of Queensland, but for Australia as a whole. And if you have enjoyed it, then please do consider leaving a like and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We'll touch on those thunderstorms across the southeast of Queensland in great detail tomorrow. Tropical Cyclone Sean really stole the show today, and we'll also be talking about that rainfall up in the far northern areas of Queensland in great detail tomorrow as well, so make sure you are sticking around for that. A special shout out to the channel sponsors. Their names are on screen right now. I could not run this show without them. Again, their support is much appreciated, but that is all from me today, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.